and I was looking at my hands and looking at the world around me, I literally thought none of this is real. That was not good. I was very scared. And everything that I was or that I had thought to be or that I had assumed to be in myself was directly challenged by that whole experience.
Joe, from the outside, it would have looked like your life was totally on track. You had this long-term relationship. You're graduating from literally one of the top business schools in America. You had a job offer at Microsoft and really a future ahead of you that most people could only dream of. But then something shifted that led to you walking away from all of it. And somehow that led to you being the most truly peaceful, joyous, and happy person that I know. And that's to a depth and a degree that few human beings ever reach in their entire lives. And I'm so grateful that we get to learn from your journey today. And I'm hoping, take me back to the college days, right before things started to shift. What was going on in your life? And from the outside, what would someone have seen?
So in my college days specifically, before the shift started to happen, I was a junior in school, about to go study abroad in Hong Kong. So it was my first semester of junior year, or second semester. It was towards the end of COVID, so 2020.
Sure.
And I had recently gotten my job offer from Microsoft, or my internship offer. I was about to go head to Hong Kong to visit one of the best business schools in Asia. And I was living with a couple of friends at the time. So I was just a college kid with a lot of good opportunities going on, a long-term relationship, had just gotten a great internship opportunity. From the outside, I just looked like a happy college kid.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case at all. I was smoking weed all the time and constantly avoiding conversations with my girlfriend at the time because I felt a lot of stress and anxiety about the relationship. And the Microsoft opportunity was exciting, but for probably the wrong reasons. I subconsciously wanted the best opportunity out of all of my friends and all of my peers. So it was a bit of competition. It was a bit of striving for money, for status, for all of these things. And ultimately, my life in general was, from the outside, great, but from the inside, just a constant battle of pleasing those around me.
Yeah. I think that's so relatable. There's so often we're striving for status. We're striving to be the best in our social circle. And in that, there's so many sacrifices that get made. And then we don't face our problems, like what you were talking about with the relationship, avoiding those things. The relationship starts to spiral, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, so that's where we are. We're in COVID times, mid-college career. And then what happened? Where's this journey go from here?
Right. Funny enough, actually, I had just got caught cheating on one of my final exams for a business statistics class. And I had found out that I might not be able to go to Hong Kong because of that.
Yeah.
So I was pretty down bad at that point in time.
Yeah.
And I was about to...
Sorry, Joe. Was that a normal thing for you at the time, cheating on an exam? Or was that
Yeah, all the time.
Sure. But this time you got caught.
This time I did get caught, yeah.
Sure. Okay.
And this time there was actually consequences because I'd gotten accepted into this program and they were like, that's not good.
Yeah.
I was a little upset about that. And that was honestly a bit of a wake-up call in some ways. What am I doing? Why am I taking these classes? Why am I doing these things that I don't want to be doing? But I had just found that out, and I was going to take a road trip with my mom from the west coast of the States to the east coast of the States before I left to Hong Kong, because that was a 5-6 month time period that I was going to be in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So I fly out to Las Vegas, Nevada to visit my brother. And ironically enough, I am visiting my brother about an hour and a half from where he was living 5 years ago. So
True.
I came to visit him. My mom had already driven up here. Right when I got here, I had actually figured out that I was able to study abroad, which was a good thing.
Right. So they had said hey, you cheated and slap on the wrist and don't do it again, but we're still going to let you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So that was a relief, but that didn't really change where I was in my life at that point in time, obviously.
Sure.
So I meet up with my mom and my brother over here in Las Vegas, and I spend a couple days with my brother, and then my mom and I take this road trip all the way from we started really more west, like Utah, all the way back to North Carolina. And she had all these national parks planned out, all of these different places. She had planned the whole thing out like a 2-week trip, probably. I was just there for
Mm-hmm.
the ride, very
Yeah,
open to anything that was there.
sure.
And so within, I think on day 3 or 4 of the trip, we were in Arizona, where I'm at right now. And she had taken me in the morning to a Mahayana Buddhist temple. And I go into this Buddhist temple not knowing what to expect at all, but very open. And the monk, I don't know what to call him, that was leading the service over there, he gave probably like a 15 to 20-minute philosophy of their tradition and then led us in a guided meditation after that.
Okay.
So the 15 to 20-minute philosophical talk really made sense to my logical brain at the time. I was very
Mm,
much so always in my head, you could say.
mm,
And he was like, yeah, well, we just want world peace. And I was like, okay, that's valid. Like, I can
fair enough, dude.
understand that. He was like, that can be really abstract for people. So if world peace is too abstract for you to think about peace for your country. If that's too abstract, think about peace for your state, then your neighborhood, then your household, then just for yourself. All basically saying that at the end of the day, if we want world peace, it starts with peace within ourselves. Simple as that. So I was like, okay, I can get behind that. I like peace. That's fun.
Yeah.
But then he guided us through a meditation, and I forget what he said or how he did it. I think it might have just been the process of being in an environment, closing my eyes, breathing intentionally, and being present with what I was experiencing. And I remember afterwards, I felt this like warmth in my chest, in my heart, and that was new. And I was excited to talk. I was like, Mom, this is so cool. He said this, and this makes a lot of sense. And da 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 da. My mom had kind of been on like a self-help started her spiritual journey, a couple years before that. So none of these things were necessarily new to her specifically, but that's when everything kind of started to open up for me.
Right. Okay. So you're about to go to Hong Kong for a couple of months. You said 5 to 6 months. You fly out to Nevada with and meet your mom out there. Your brother's out there. You and your mom do a road trip back. She planned everything, and here you are, a young dude in college, just dropping into a Buddhist temple, and you're like, sure, let's see what's going on. And this monk, let's say, gets up to the front and starts talking about peace, resonates with the logical side of your mind, and then takes you through this meditation. And interestingly, so a couple of things. One is that as we create peace within ourselves, we create peace outside of ourselves as well. I think that that's something that was a big eye opener for me once I realized that that's actually what we have control over and that's what we focus on. And anyways, once you started to practice this meditation that he was leading you through, you felt that warmth. And you mentioned that warmth as if it's like in contrast to what you were feeling previously. Like, can you say more on that?
Yeah, and I didn't know that either. So I felt this thing that previously allowed me to realize, or that allowed me to realize that previously I wasn't really feeling anything. It was almost as if I had really felt for the first time in a while,
Got it.
which is interesting because as I reflect, there were obviously lots of strong feelings and emotions, especially in the relationship that I was in at the time that I had
Yeah.
had and that I had expressed. But this was something very different. It was deep and it was strong yet calming and secure, kind of like a big blanket that you put on at night. You just feel cozy under. And I definitely hadn't felt anything like that. Something secure, something stable in a long
Yeah.
time.
That makes sense. And so then you're sharing this with your mom and you're like, yo, this is amazing. And she's like, my sweet Padawan. I
Yes.
don't know. What did she actually say? How'd she respond?
I think she was excited because she had started to see the value in a lot of these concepts, and I don't think she had many people to share that with specifically.
Sure.
So she was like, yeah, and this and that. And she also came from a place of beginner's mind and learning. So we were sharing perspectives as well. A lot of similar perspectives that she had engaged in were from like Toltec wisdom. So Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements, The Mastery of Love, those types of books. So after this road trip, actually, as I was preparing to leave for Hong Kong, she gave me those two books, The Four Agreements and The Mastery of Love,
Nice.
to take to Hong Kong with me. But it was related to stuff that she had read there. So we were starting to align. And I think she was just above all else happy for me that I was feeling loving and encouraged to continue to move towards that direction.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. And then so you end up obviously making it back to North Carolina and you go to Hong Kong. Was there anything in between that you want to share or just go right to Hong Kong?
Nothing crazy. I got COVID in between North Carolina and Hong Kong and wasn't able to
Pleasant.
see family members. And then my 21st birthday was December 7th, and I left out on like December 22nd or something. But
Right.
since I had COVID, we celebrated my birthday the night before I went to Hong Kong, and I had a couple hits of a dab pen and drank a couple like IPA beers, and I don't really drink, and the combination of those things just had me throwing up at the dinner with my
No.
mom and my
Oh
dad
no.
and my poor friend that was there. So I literally I passed out on the table. I actually went unconscious and woke up to somebody like, "What's your name? Where are you?" But that was just funny. It gives a bit more of a representation of where I was at my life at the time. And then I woke up, 4 or 5 hours later, hungover, have to leave for a 6 month trip in probably like an hour. I hadn't packed anything, so I scrambled to pack for 6 months of travel. But yeah, I mean, and then Hong Kong, we flew over there. That was like a 36-hour trip because of some logistical things that happened, which is also just funny to remember as I'm telling the story again. But I got to Hong Kong, took a COVID test almost immediately, had to get taken to my hotel where I quarantined for 21 days. I had this like house arrest wristband on. And if
Right.
I left my quarantine cell, or the hotel room I was in, is probably a better way of calling it, then I would have had to go to what they called quote unquote quarantine camp. So I got to Hong Kong not too long after that experience and was stuck in a small hotel room for 21 days.
Dang. I imagine that would have been pretty scary. Like you're in a foreign country and they are basically immediately putting you on house arrest in a global pandemic. What was that like?
Always like pretty happy go lucky with things. So even at that time in my life when I was really not like happy, you could say,
Sure.
I was still quite open and just kind of like down for whatever. That hasn't really
Yeah,
changed. So
sure.
I wasn't too bothered by it. It was honestly kind of nice because the relationship I was in at the time was very demanding of my time. It was both of us were very unhealthily attached to each other, but there was an expectation that I would reply to text messages all the time and that I would always be there and that I was always kind of be glued to my phone. So it was honestly not bad. I got to go to Hong Kong and then had all of this time by myself that I could spend on understanding like how is this dynamic going to work in my relationship. And then I had other people that were going through it with me as well. In the program, there were students from my university in North Carolina and then the university in Hong Kong and the university in Copenhagen that the program
Right.
was through too. So there's probably about 40 of us between the North Carolina people and the Copenhagen people that were all going through this quarantine around the same time. So that was a good shared
Okay.
experience to have with
So
people.
it wasn't like you got there and everyone else was gallivanting around Hong Kong. You were all in quarantine.
Correct. In that
I
flight
see.
over to Hong Kong, that 36 hours of travel, I did that with like 6 or 7 other people from North
Sure.
Carolina. So we all kind of shared the experience together.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine that there's like a camaraderie in facing uncertainty that seems to provide stability through those experiences, as well as just an open mind. It makes a big difference, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then what happened?
So 21 days of quarantine goes by. As a short aside, I started posting on TikTok in that time and went viral on TikTok a couple of times. They got me fascinated into content, which is related to business and a number of other things. But I think that's actually kind of a significant point in this whole journey because it showed me what was possible with social media and that there are avenues of creative expression that can lead to like fruitful living, so to speak. And I wasn't thinking about it too much back then. I was like, oh, this is crazy. I want to keep going viral. But it's been
Sure.
encouraging looking back at it. But yeah, I am in quarantine. I don't think I started reading any of the books that my mom gave me at that point in time. I'm working out
Classic.
there. I started meditating more. So I was curious by meditation, was just looking up guided meditations online. Hey, 5 minute guided meditation, chakra meditation.
Sure.
I had no idea what I was searching or Googling up, but I was meditating. I'll put it like
Yeah.
that. I was sitting
Yeah.
still for a couple minutes.
Cool. And
So,
this is directly due to what had happened at the temple. Is that right?
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
directly inspired by that.
Sure.
So then I get out of quarantine. And for the first few months after that, up until April, similar stuff. I'm meditating a couple times a week. There was one time where I did like a 1 hour guided, like meet your spirit guide activity kind of
Nice.
thing.
Yeah.
Just exploring and sitting still really is what I was doing. And then I started reading the books that my mom had given me. So the Four Agreements was very impactful. I closed the cover of that book one day and I felt like I looked around, went on a walk along my campus in Hong Kong, and everything was just more vibrant and full. I was just happy. That was very fascinating. And then I read The
Yeah.
Mastery of Love too. So both of those books in a couple week period, probably around March, April of 2021, March probably. And I was just happy getting all of these loving concepts. And it was funny too, because I had felt like I had discovered like the rarest knowledge in the world. So I was going around telling all of my friends who I felt were negative and not too happy, like, hey, we just got to like not take things personally and love other people and not have any expectations. And we can just be grateful. Like all of this knowledge was so new and beautiful to me. But on top of that, I was also feeling some of the additional benefits of the meditative practice as well. So I was like super high on life up until April when I was still in Hong Kong.
Right, right, right. And so I can understand the maybe the fascination and the excitement around going from a state that is unpleasant to all of a sudden discovering this treasure trove of knowledge that life can be loving and vibrant and exciting. What was that? Can you just share more on like what was that like to start to feel those things?
Yeah, it was a lot of things, I guess. So the first thing that comes to mind is it was just pretty liberating and exciting to be experiencing happiness and to stumble upon knowledge or philosophy that made a lot of sense to me about this kind of stuff. So oftentimes I feel like when people talk about emotions, when they talk about well-being, when they talk about spirituality, for many logically minded people, it doesn't necessarily compute and it sounds like a bunch of nonsense. But the way that it was presented to me was so simple and so truthful and so rational that it just made perfect sense to the way that my brain works. And because of that, I had a lot of time repeating it and re-piecing it together so I could deepen my understanding. So there was the happiness on my side of things, but then there was also a bit of a feeling of isolation. Like, hey, I'm realizing and embodying and understanding these really harmonious truths about our experience. And I want to share this with those around me, my girlfriend at the time, my friends who I was traveling with. And many of them were just like, this is way too idealistic, or I can't
Yeah.
see things this way. And it did notice it it was revealing to me how I saw that my way of thinking and being was somehow like better, or I wanted to change the way that they thought to be where I was. It was very innocent, but still counterintuitive to what the idea of what true love and self-fulfillment is. So it was more liberating than what I was experiencing previously, but there were still hints of like, yeah, I'm just like out here telling everybody about this and being Mr. Woo Woo spiritual man to all these people, and they just kind of want to like sit in their darkness or sit in their way of being and not be challenged in any way.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I know for myself when I first, so I'm very analytical by nature. Growing up, I was like all in math or science. If it's not black or white, I want nothing to do with it. That was like where I came from. And then so I wanted nothing to do with spirituality or religion or anything like that. And so I can understand what it's like to be in those people's shoes where you got this person around you, spiritual woo woo, who's, like saying you can be loving and you can be happy. And it's like, screw you, you nonsense speaker. And I imagine also once I started to get more open to those sorts of things, I think as a result of direct experience, that's like a really important piece of the
Mm,
journey, I think.
mm,
Similar to like what you experienced in the Buddhist temple and then in the
mhm.
meditations. And I suppose as a result of things like the Four Agreements, I think that direct experience opens us up to like, oh, maybe there is something here that I haven't been paying attention to. Um, yeah. So, anyways, I think that's really interesting to note. Like, that's a significant shift that started to happen in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Direct experience, I think, is really important. And by that, I guess my understanding of this is one's direct embodied experience of something more joyful or loving. It's not just a thought, but it's really a feeling. It's something embodied. It's something a part of your experience. And thoughts can be a part of your experience, but a thought doesn't have a feeling associated with it. A thought doesn't have a clear seeing associated with it or a vibrancy. It's just a thought. It's just a thing that arises. So something can make sense in your head. You can say, oh, if I eat my macros and go to sleep and lift every day, then I'm going to get strong. But the direct experience of being strong is lifting the weights and feeling the muscles. And so, yeah, the direct experience of freedom, of happiness, of love, of joy is not a thought, but it's actually, embodying and feeling those things within your own experience. So I agree. That's the most important part.
Yeah, man. Great articulation of that.
Thank you.
Cool. And then what?
And then what? So, yep. 4 months in, around April, it's actually 420 in Hong Kong. I had met these guys that I played basketball with. They didn't go to the same school that I went to. One of them did, but he introduced me to all of his high school friends who went to other colleges in Hong Kong. And I was playing basketball with them around once a week, but we came to hang out this day. One of the guys, Melvin, he was like, oh yeah, you talk about like spiritual stuff and meditation. I have a friend who's coming over. His name is Cosby. I got to introduce the two of you. And I was like, okay, cool. So I meet Cosby, and this guy had done a 10-day meditation retreat before. He was around my age at the time, so 21, 22, however old I was. And he starts talking to me about like deep Buddhist philosophy. And this guy named Frank Yang, who has been a big influence, he's been on my YouTube channel, and he's, just really interesting dude, but very deep into all the spiritual stuff, meditation, has been a meditator for like over 10 years now. So he shows me this Frank Yang video, and he's talking about enlightenment, and he's talking about the metaphysics of Buddhism specifically. So he's talking about emptiness and vast spaciousness of consciousness and all of this other stuff, which was new to me. The more, what's the metaphysical nature of reality? Which again, you can conceptually understand, but how do you experience that?
Yeah.
It's infinite by nature and all of this stuff, right? Up until that point, sure, I had been meditating a little bit, but most of my knowledge was coming from a more moralistic side of things. Like, we need to love people and we need to be compassionate, and this is how we can cultivate love and compassion. And he's more so saying, we need insight into the nature of reality, and how can we experience the direct nature of reality through an insight type of meditation practice. So he's telling me about these things, and as he's talking, he's describing an out-of-body experience that he had. And
This
I
is
closed my
Cosby?
eyes. Huh?
This is Cosby who's telling you about this?
This is Cosby. We're in the bathroom of Melvin's place. It's me, Cosby, Melvin, and then my friend Alex, who I went to university with in Sheffield Hill. He also played basketball with us on the weekends.
Yeah.
So he's talking about this experience that he had that was out of body, and I just kind of close my eyes and I'm listening to him. And it feels like all of my skin on my body, face, body, hands, everything. I'm sitting down on a counter. It feels like they all kind of, almost when you get something falls asleep and it feels all staticky all across your body. So it felt staticky, all of these individual kind of static particles, noise along my body. And it felt like each of those little particles was like, a water droplet in the ocean, and my body was the ocean. And all of the particles just started evaporating up into the sky, as if it was like a hot day, the sun was shining on my body, and then the water particles that were my body just started to rise up and merge with the sky or whatever it was. And so, my whole body just disappeared. I didn't have any sense of body anymore. I didn't have any sense of any of that. And that was only like a couple of seconds before I like came back to, and I was very wide-eyed and was like, whoa, something crazy just happened. But then shortly after that, I started throwing up in the sink right next to me.
Right.
So I throw up
shortly, as in like a couple of minutes, couple of seconds?
Seconds, probably. Yeah, within 15 seconds, I would say.
Sure. Okay.
So I started throwing up in the sink, and everybody is like, what the heck is happening to this dude? And I was like, y'all need to get out of here. Something's happening. I don't know what. I'll be fine. So they left. I lay down on the floor, and then, long story short, for the next 2 hours, I had this out-of-body experience. And it was like 30 to 45 minutes of total out-of-body. And then I would like sit up for a second. I would wake up and sit up and look around the bathroom for a second, maybe at max a minute or two.
Sure.
And I laid back down and would go back into like 30, 45 minutes of out-of-body stuff. And that was about a 2-hour experience.
Right. Now, I imagine that the timing is something you kind of piece together after, as in like, yeah, it was probably roughly something like that. Because I imagine you were quite disoriented or feeling different than, let's say, your normal state of being. Is that right?
Yeah, so I wrote down a really long note shortly after the whole thing ended. And I remember in the note specifically, it said something along the lines of like, that experience could have been 2 seconds or 2 lifetimes. And I wouldn't have known the difference. Yeah.
Can you say more on that? What is that? Yeah. Yeah. Can you say more on that?
Yeah. So time definitely was not as normal feeling as it is now. It's strange because like after an experience like that and the whole journey that's unfolded since then, there's been a lot of more deeper realizations about the nature of some things. Time now, in my own experience, is a little silly and feels a little like deconstructed. Like I'm just here and things continue
Sure.
to happen. But there still is like a standard sense of time, right? Like I wake up in the morning and I go to bed and that feels how it feels
Yeah.
in terms of, oh, it's felt like a day. But in that
Mm-hmm.
out of body experience that was taking place, there was not really any way for me to tell time from the perspective that what I guess, was quote unquote experiencing was nothing like what I experience in my day to day life. So if I have a long conversation with somebody, it's like, oh, yeah, it was probably a couple hours. But in
Sure.
this experience, there were a ton of visuals. So at one point in time, it was like I was looking at myself from a third person perspective. So say I was in the
Mm.
bathroom and it was like I was looking down at my body as if I was hanging out on the ceiling or something. But then
Hmm.
for the most of this experience, the bathroom that I was in was not there. My body was not there. It was like a whole different conscious realm of experience, you could say. Some of it very visual, like visuals I had seen before, like Princess Peach or a Fortnite bus flying through the sky or something. And then
Right.
at
So
other
almost like a
times,
dreamlike state
yeah,
where there's visuals going on. Okay, sure.
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Like if sometimes you wake up in the morning and then you fall asleep for 15 minutes and then you have a really
Yeah.
vivid dream for that 15 minutes and you're like, that felt like, 3 days of a dream, but I was asleep for 15
Sure.
minutes. So part
Yeah.
of it was
Okay.
that. Part of it was looking at myself from a third person. And then another part of it was just really abstract visuals. Yeah, like honestly, stuff that's incomprehensible to try to describe in any way. But outside of standard stuff that was in my imagination or that I had seen and like in my life before, and a lot of strange, interesting like vibrational tunes and sounds and stuff like that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that was just super strange. And like to be honest, all of this, I saw visuals and I had this crazy thing happen and
Mm.
like I used to get really caught up on that experience. But that's all it was, is it was just an experience. Like not something to try to go back to, not something that indicated that I was at like a higher state of consciousness, not anything special, just something that happened. And it was something that happened and that was so far outside of my normal perceptual experience that when I came back, and I was looking at my hands and looking at the world around me, I literally thought none of this is real. And that was not good. I was very scared. And everything that I was or that I had thought to be or that I had assumed to be in myself was directly challenged by that whole experience. Because I, quote unquote, had that experience, but whatever I took myself to be previously, i.e., my mind, my body, my thoughts, that was not there. So then it was very clear to me that whatever I was not this body. It was not these thoughts. It was something else. And I didn't know what that thing was. But that experience kind of scared me and really shocked the ego to the point, the sense of self to the point where I'd kind of overcorrected. And I was looking around at the entire world thinking that none of it was real at all, that all of it was fake. Yeah.
Okay. I've got a number of questions here. The first is because I think people listening are going to ask, were you on drugs? And if so, what drugs were you on?
Right. So I had taken 2 puffs of a joint of weed. Yep. That was it.
Yeah,
And
so it's
up
not like
until
you're taking psychedelics, you're not doing some crazy hard things, you just couple puffs of a joint.
No, and I was up until that point, I was actually smoking pretty regularly. So I was smoking, I want to say almost daily at that point, probably daily at that point. And everybody else that I was with also smoked the same thing, and
Mm-hmm.
they were totally fine. It was just a normal weed experience for them. Yeah, it was 2 puffs. I was smoking like entire joints leading up to that, you know? So
Yeah. So it's nothing that would have been crazy for you.
no, and it's nothing upon further research, investigation, talking to people, just my own understanding of the experience. Yeah, it felt like it had nothing, if anything, to do at all with the weed. And I think actually part of me throwing up was, in a sense, there was one time, actually, that first time I visited my brother, where this whole story started. I tried keeping up with him with like dabs and edibles and weeds and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I was just like greening out on the toilet the whole night, throwing up.
Yeah.
But something about weed specifically, I feel when you throw it up, you immediately feel better. It's like the THC is almost out of
Hmm.
your system. So
Sure.
it almost felt like I took those 2 hits and then I had that out of body thing start to happen.
Yeah.
And
The
then it was almost
evaporation.
like, yep, yep. And then it was almost like I purged the weed out of me in the throwing up and then went into
Yeah.
that experience. So obviously it had something to do with the experience, but it was different. I mean, I've smoked weed so many times in my life. That was definitely like the most crazy experience ever off of the smallest dose. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Again, mostly just ask to clarify for people listening. The other thing that you mentioned, and then we're going to get back to the none of it was real. You mentioned the perspective that it was simply an experience. And I think it's a really worthwhile thing to talk about because that was a really changed things for me in my life when I realized, back to what you had said previously, thoughts are just an experience that we experience. We might say it's a mental sensation that we experience.
Right.
And there's like a depersonalization to things that we can take. And so when you're talking about this, you're not making something out of the experience. It was just an experience. And you emphasize that. And I just want to touch on that a little more and hear you say any thoughts you have about that.
Yeah. So that experience was so profound to me at the time that I felt like there was something deeper to it than any other part of experience. Right. So I
Sure.
felt like that experience was more profound than the one that I'm having right now, speaking to you.
Hmm.
And I also felt like there was something more profound and more truthful about that experience that I wasn't experiencing or am not experiencing right now. And because of that, took me away from wherever I was right now. Say I hadn't processed this and I was still kind of in that mindset. Instead of being here present with you, kind of mystified at just how like beautiful this experience is right now between me
Hmm.
and you and how unique it is and how this is the only time we'll ever have this experience,
Hmm.
I would be thinking about, hey, how do I get back to that place that I was in? How do I go back to that experience? I want to explore one more time. I need to recreate those conditions because I'm still confused by what happened specifically.
Yeah.
I feel like the truth, quote unquote, lies within something like that. I need to go deeper into that world, that realm, if I really want to understand like what's going on here. And for so long, I just always felt like I was stuck in a mundane, normal experience, and I had to get back to that old experience. But again, it's just an experience. And what we are and where deep peace lies is not in experiences because those are fleeting. Any experience by nature goes away. It arises and it passes. That experience that I had in Hong Kong is gone. It came and it went. This conversation that I'm having with you, it's coming now and it will go.
Hmm.
This word that I'm saying right now, it just rose and it's gone immediately. After a
Hmm.
word comes out of my mouth, it's immediately gone. So if I say the word meditation, it's gone now.
Hmm.
So it's like the ability to let go of experiences and let the process continue to unfold rather than being attached to, hey, I had this really happy or amazing or wonderful or crazy or mind-blowing thing happen to me. I'm going to stick in the past and ruminate on that thing and constantly try to get back to that thing. I think reflection is also an experience. So right now I'm reflecting on these events, and that's perfectly fine to have that happen. But to actively not want to be where I am right now and to actively want to go back somewhere, to actively want to go forward somewhere and thinking that my happiness or that my peace or that my understanding of truth lies within going to somewhere that isn't here. That's where I was stuck at, thinking I can't understand this reality. I can't find truth in my experience unless I go back to that place, rather than saying, the truth is always here in my experience. Peace can always be found right now. Where is it right now? Let's embody it. Let's find it. Let's be with it, kind of thing. Yeah.
So at the time, if I'm understanding correctly, you experienced this out of body experience, and it was such a profound and different experience for you that there was an attachment to it. There was I need to get back there because clearly what I've thought to be true is not true.
Yep.
And I need to therefore start to find what is true. And what you just explained was that the happiness, the peace, comes from what is here and now, acknowledging the temporary nature of all of the rising and passing of experience. And when we stop clinging to things in the past or searching for things in the future and really lean into what is here and now, then we get the peace and the happiness that is always here for us to find. Is that right, or is there anything about that you'd clarify?
Yeah, I'd like to clarify a couple things. So I think oftentimes we hear this notion that like we just need to be in the present. We just need to be in the here and now, and it'll all magically fall away and we'll experience this deep peace and this happiness. I think my perspective on that has evolved, and especially when speaking to an audience of people and to others, that can sound frustrating because they're like, okay, well, I'm here and I don't feel
Yeah.
this peace. So it can sound almost condescending. Like it is
Sure.
very simple. Like, hey, let's just be here because here is all we have. But I would say that it's first a recognition that you can't be anywhere other than here. This is
Right.
the only place you could ever be. And what is the present moment? Well, you could say it's what's here right now. So then what is the past and what is the future? What is time? So when the past happened, it happened in the present moment. And when we think about the past now, those thoughts of the past arise in the present moment. And then the future is just a figment of our imagination. I could say, tomorrow we're going to have a phone call, me and you, Jordan, but that's just in my imagination, and it's in my imagination right now. So any idea of the future also exists as a byproduct of the present moment. So you can never not be present. So great, you're already here, you're already in the present moment.
Success.
Right. And then I think happiness, peace, they're interesting words. If we're describing emotions, emotions are also fleeting. To expect yourself to be in a extremely pleasant state all the time is, I think, naive. And I think it's more so having an unconditional acceptance towards whatever is here right now, and then not wanting to change whatever is here right now. So if I were to say, hey, Jordan, I love this podcast that we're doing. It's great. But I would rather actually both of us be in Costa Rica recording this right now. That would be so much better. I would be so much happier. Or I could say, hey, the sun's kind of in my eyes. I don't like that at all. I need to change it. My experience would be happier and more peaceful if the sun wasn't in my eyes.
Sure.
That wanting this moment to be different. I think the distance between where you are and truly where you would like to be, that is where your suffering lies. And when there is suffering, there is not that peace and that happiness. So peace can be seen as an emotion that's fleeting. I kind of see it as this state of being that we can always exist in, so to speak. And so you can be at peace with the pain that you're feeling. You can be at peace with the grief that you're experiencing. You can be at peace with the happiness that's here. All of the things that are impermanent, all of the material things or the sensations or the emotions or the thoughts that arise in our experience, they go away too. But how can you be with those things, not clinging to them, not attaching to them, not wanting the unpleasant moments to go away quickly, not wanting the happy moments and the pleasurable things to stay forever, but just to simply be with what's here and not prefer for it to be any different, and then accept whatever unfolds within the experience afterwards. So right now, if I'm here talking to you, that's great. I'm gonna be here and talk to you, and I'm not gonna want to be anywhere else doing anything else. And that to me is the peace.
Right. So just to make sure I understood that correctly, what you're saying is that if we show up with acceptance to whatever is presented in the here and now, if we choose to be with what is here, like the sun in our eyes or anything like that, and not want it to be different, but just allow it to be what it is, then the byproduct of approaching things that way is this feeling of peace, and that we can feel peace with sadness or with grief or with anger or any other sort of emotion by just simply being here with it, allowing it to be what it is and accepting it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's great. You could see peace as like the opposite of suffering. Like where there is peace, there is not suffering, and where there is suffering, there is not peace. That's A-framing. Something that's been very clear to me recently is that, Yeah, this craving is suffering. So if you want to figure out what it means to suffer, take any vice that you have, whether it's a drug or a person or your phone or Instagram or whatever, food even. Notice when you start to crave that thing, and then don't go do that thing, and
Hmm.
abstain or withstain from doing that thing for as long as you can. And you will see how painful it is to not have this thing that you want to have, and
Hmm.
just sit with that. And
Hmm.
that uncomfortableness, that unpleasant, that desire to get the thing that you don't have right now, that continues to build as time passes and you still don't have that thing, that is where the suffering is. So how can we truly be at peace without falling into these temptations, without grabbing all of these external things that we seek for pleasure, or that we are averse to because we don't want to experience unpleasant emotions? Like, another
Hmm.
thing is, say you have an uncomfortable conversation that you need to have with somebody. You being averse to that conversation, that has an icky feeling associated with it. That
Hmm.
aversion, I could say, is suffering, because you don't want to have the conversation, right? You actively desire not to do the thing that you know needs to be done or that is going to
Hmm.
happen. So yeah, how much do we crave something that is not in our experience right now?
Hmm.
I want to get on Instagram right now, or I need to go eat this food, or oh, I need to hit
Hmm.
this hit of whatever it is, or
Yeah.
I want to go watch porn. I mean, any of these things, right?
Yeah.
It's not here right now, and you desire it deeply. And so that's the separation between where you are now and what you want. And that's where the suffering is. Yeah, just like, how can I be grateful for what's here and fully accepting
Hmm.
what's here? Like, right now, in this moment, there's nothing additional that I need. It's the constant coming back to the realization that in any given moment, you actually have everything that you need. And that's peaceful.
Yeah. How do you think somebody can get to that point where they realize that they have everything that they need when they're in a situation where they've not felt that before due to insecurity, or the relationship's unstable, or they've just bottled up emotions for their entire life, and so they crave to escape from those emotions with things that you mentioned, taking a hit of something, porn, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
How can somebody bridge that gap and get to the place where they can start to feel that?
Right. Obviously, I would say to just start right now. What's here, right? And then having a very non judgmental and curious and kind of playful approach to just understanding what's here right now. So if I were somebody, I would say, okay, right now I'm breathing. Right now there's seeing. Right now there's a thought. Right now there are birds chirping. Right now there's a beautiful tree in front of me. Just sitting in stillness or in silence and being curious about what's going on here. Like, oftentimes people label things as right or wrong. Let's just notice what's here. We don't need to label it as good or bad. If there, oh my gosh, there's a painful feeling in my stomach. That's what's here. Let's be with it. And the more
Even
that
if
we,
it's unpleasant.
even if it's unpleasant, despite its unpleasantness, it's still here, right?
Hmm.
And we can be curious about that. So typically I say, just notice thoughts, notice feelings, notice desires to do something, notice actions, coat your entire experience with awareness. And that
Hmm.
awareness is kind of medicinal in and of itself. We don't need to try to stop doing something. If we become aware of the consequences of certain actions that we have, negative or positive, that then reinforces whether we do them or not. So oftentimes we're perpetually doing things that are causing negative outcomes for us, but we're not aware enough of our emotions or of the results of that action that we keep engaging in it. But as soon
Hmm.
as we realize it's not worth it for us to do this thing, it's actually not good for my feelings, my emotional state of being, it's not good for my thoughts, that's when we stop it. But that
Hmm.
only comes from the awareness that we are doing this thing and it's having this type of impact. So, yeah, I would just say start being aware of your experience and being playful and being curious and coming back to this moment. And then maybe outside of that, just generally being grateful. I think gratitude is good. So, right now, dude, I'm having a conversation with one of my best friends. I'm sitting
Hmm.
outside and breathing. My health is not threatened right now. It's a beautiful morning. I'm safe. My life
Hmm.
isn't threatened. Things are good, man.
Yeah.
And that simple exercise of coming back to right now and being like, oh, I'm actually safe right now and I'm alive and
Hmm.
I'm breathing. And
Yeah.
that's a blessing
Yeah.
because life isn't promised.
Totally. What a beautiful articulation. I love
Thank you.
talking to you. I'm so grateful that we get to do this.
Me too, man.
Hell yeah. Okay, I want to keep going with the story though. You okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're back in Hong Kong. You just had this out of body experience. You're looking at your hands. You're like, none of this is real. And now my entire life, my conceptualization of reality itself has been shifted. I don't know if there's more like profound destabilizing than something like that. And you're in a totally different country in some random person's bathroom. Okay, take me back there. What's going on?
Yeah. So luckily, Cosby, the guy who had articulated his out of body experience, luckily this stuff wasn't too new to him, and he had had an
Sure.
experience like that. The other two guys that were there, Alex, who I went to school with, and Melvin, who I'd been playing basketball with, they were like, "Yo, I don't know what happened. I don't know what's going on." Like that, they were so like outside of, dude. This guy threw up in this. Like, can you please throw up? You like clean up your throw up, dude. That's kind of where their
Yeah.
heads were at.
Yeah.
Versus
Like,
Cosby
come
was
on,
like,
bro.
yeah, yeah. Versus Cosby was like, oh, this dude had a really profound experience that's probably life changing in some sort of way. So it was nice to talk to Cosby about it. But yeah, it really shifted my thoughts going into that conversation. More or less were like, oh, I want to be more loving, and I'm curious about the spiritual stuff. And, I want to be a good boyfriend to my girlfriend, and I want to get my high paying job at Microsoft. And then afterwards, it was literally like, am I real? Is this experience like, is this actually here? What is this? I'm confused. I don't know anything that's going on. And it wasn't, I don't know anything that's going on. If that was the case, it probably would have been a bit better because I was pretty stuck in this idea of like nothing's real. And that attachment to things not being real was probably what perpetuated a lot of suffering and mental stuff. But yeah, after that night, I think I stayed in my dorm in Hong Kong for like 2 weeks, give or take. I would go on walks, maybe see somebody every once in a while, but like I didn't go to any social events that our event was having or that our program was having. I was pretty isolated and just kind of integrating and processing all that had happened and just being with it because it was a lot and it was intense and it was overwhelming to a degree. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if you're isolating yourself, you're in your room for 2 weeks. What was going on for you at that time? Like you mentioned, okay, so I was attached to that things aren't real, but then you've also mentioned you had this girlfriend that wanted you to respond all the time. I imagine that impacted the way that you texted her or were communicating and your relationship and even the relationship with the peers that you were on this trip with. Like, yeah, what was going on?
Yeah, so I had experienced this thing that was so far outside of what anybody else around me had ever experienced before. And the other thing is I didn't have any resources or relatability here. So I had Frank Yang's YouTube channel, which if anybody checks out Frank Yang's YouTube channel, he's not necessarily like a teacher. He's kind of come into that role now, but especially at the time he was more so of an artist and just like creatively expressing this whole spiritual awakening thing, not necessarily giving advice to people on like how they could overcome it and what happens and yada yada yada. So I had his YouTube channel and I wasn't really watching it much, but I felt very isolated from the perspective that it seemed as if nobody else could relate to me specifically. So I didn't know if I was crazy. I didn't know if I had had something like a psychological break or a stroke or any of that. I left everything on the table. It felt very spiritual, but I was open to anything being the case. And so I would share my note that I wrote with some people. I was hesitant to share with other people who I didn't
Yeah.
know as well. And it was just this constant feeling of no matter who I talked to, it felt like there was not any relatability at all, except for maybe Cosby. But I met him for the first time that night that it happened. So it's not
Yeah.
like we were super close at the time.
Right. I think so. Not only does it sound like you had your entire sense of self and reality shifted and disturbed, but then you were in isolation as well, which is such a painful thing. I think everybody has experienced isolation at some point, but to couple those two things together to, I don't know what is real anymore and I'm isolated, that alone is really challenging, like very, very emotionally challenging. And then let's add in there confusion and doubt of, am I sane? Or in other words, am I crazy? What the hell has happened? There's no
Yeah,
one that can give me guidance on this. Like, man, I imagine that was a really challenging time.
it was. And it's nuts because as I'm reflecting on it and thinking back, like, oh, yeah, that definitely was challenging. It was not even close to the most challenging part of everything that's happened in the last 4 years or so, though. And as you mentioned these things, I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. So I guess in that 2 week period, I was really just processing, for lack of a better word. Like,
Sure.
it was almost like I couldn't go to any of the social events with our group because they would have wanted to talk about the food they were eating, and I would have been sitting there like, you guys realize
What
you
is
don't
food?
exist, right? Like, there's something so far beyond this that's here. Like, probably a bit of like
Sure.
quote unquote spiritual ego in there as well. But
Yeah.
my mind, the last thing my mind was focused on was just like the things of this world, so to speak,
Sure.
which is funny because like, what does that even mean? But
Yeah.
yeah, whatever. I continue to meditate. I continue to have that experience. I think a couple months prior to that, I had done my first psychedelic. So I was kind of curious about psychedelics a little bit more, but I think it was a while actually before I ever did a psychedelic again. So yeah, it just processing, going through the motions, existing in Hong Kong. A lot of things started to stabilize and normalize, but there was this profound, like, I want to keep reading and I want to keep meditating and I want to keep figuring out what's going on. It
Yeah.
did become a curiosity, like, what is enlightenment? I think the thing that I experienced has something to do with that. That's where my head was at the time. And I want to
Right.
like keep getting closer to this thing because apparently it's like the only thing that will help me understand and contextualize and find peace with all of this.
Sure.
So yeah, I kept meditating, finished my Hong Kong trip. That summer, I went to South Carolina. That's where my girlfriend was at the time. She was getting her master's degree over there. I did my Microsoft internship during that summer, and that was cool. Whatever. I lived there. I was hanging out with her. I was meditating. I was doing my Microsoft internship. I was still reading a lot of books, trying to get my theory of all this stuff down better, understand Buddhism better, understand awakening better, understand meditation, all that stuff better. Still just kind of like going about my life. In some ways, I had forgot about that experience, but in other ways, it was still very prevalent. I wasn't as freaked out about it.
Sure.
And especially when I had other people around and things going on in my life, it was like, I'll show up to these things because that's what's already here.
Sure.
But yeah, I introduced like meditation and mindfulness to a number of people at Microsoft, which is cool. I started talking about
Mainly.
yoga and mindfulness and meditation more with other people that I met, and that was fun. Deep into like psychological and philosophical discussions with people. That was fun as well. I was kind of in this stage of just learning a lot and sharing a lot with other people, and they thought it was fascinating because it's like,
Sure.
related to their well-being and their suffering and whatever. So then, after that summer, I have a study abroad in Copenhagen with that same group of people that I was with.
Okay, so sorry, we're in like fall 2021?
Yeah, let's say when I got to Copenhagen, that was like August, September 2021. And so I'm traveling in Copenhagen. I'm talking to people. I have a pretty good routine set up. I'm not really going to classes because in Copenhagen, you just need to show up for the final exam. And I didn't care about school that much at that point in time.
Right.
Reading more about meditation and like all these esoteric books too, like, numerology books and geometry books and raising your vibration books and da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
I
Sure.
stumbled upon The Power of Now. That was a great book. And so
By
I
Eckhart
started,
Tolle?
yep, yep. I
Yeah,
really
great book.
started resonating with that book specifically, implementing some of the teachings there. I had friends in Hong Kong and in my group that were into like more spiritual stuff and open to exploring that. So we started, I started talking to them about meditation. Sheil, who you know, and then let's see, Power of Now. I went on a Sheil, who I just mentioned, was one of the guys in my batch. He was aware of this. Let's see, this. It was a Mahayana Buddhist retreat. So the same type of temple that I went to for the first time in Arizona, there was one in Copenhagen, and they had a retreat, like a 3-day retreat. So I went on this 3-day meditation retreat. That was really eye-opening. It was like halfway silent, halfway talking. So the first half of the day was silent. The second half we could talk, but we were only encouraged to talk about the stuff we were learning. And we meditated a couple hours a day in like 20 to 30-minute batches, and then got an educational speech or talk from the guy that was leading it. So that was cool. That was eye-opening. He talked about love and attachment and what it means to love and what it means to be attached. I think very briefly he said, attachment is depending on somebody or something for your happiness, and love is wishing others happiness. And then he also talked about the delusions of the mind. So all of these negative things that cause harm to other people are a byproduct of delusions or wrong views or false beliefs that we have in our minds. And if somebody is upset with you or if somebody hurts you, it's not them, because at their core, they are pure. They're just seeing unclearly and have a distorted perception, i.e., they have a delusion. And so we don't point at the person, we point at the delusion inside of the person. And we
Yeah.
focus on removing delusions so we can see clearly and act wholly and peacefully. And that's similar to, like, a more Christian type of view, which is don't hate the sinner, hate the sin. Similar thing. Don't hate the person who's acting delusionally, hate the delusion itself. And so, yeah, at the end of that, I kind of realized, like, my relationship was a big thing for me at the time that was holding me back. After the Hong Kong event as well, a lot of my realizations started to point towards this idea that so much of my life was being lived for other people rather than myself. The biggest one was probably my girlfriend at the time. Upon going to this retreat, more reflections, more traveling, more meditation, more reading, Power of Now, etc., I essentially came to the conclusion, yeah, I got to end this relationship. It's not healthy. It's not good for me. So that was a more complex and lengthy process of ending the relationship than maybe it could have been. But I mean, it's 3.5 years. We'd had a history of, like, on and off a little bit before, had broken up once or twice for like a week prior. A lot of attachment style stuff going in there, but that was really hard. Getting the courage, that's a very real world pragmatic thing. Like, getting the courage to end that relationship and understanding that it was the right thing to do. Yeah.
Let's dive into that for a second, because so many people are in relationships that are unhealthy and suboptimal for their well-being. Often I find clients will come in, and even in my own relationship, we get into relationships with the first person that we form any sort of emotional connection with. And that emotional connection is the thing Dr. Sue Johnson talks about in her book, Hold Me Tight. And John Bowlby was the creator of attachment theory. He talks about how emotional connection is the thing that we all want in relationships. And so I think when we have that emotional connection with somebody who is maybe not the right fit for us, it's so painful to let go of that. And I know, like you mentioned, courage. I think that's totally the right word. And in the past, I did not have the courage to leave a relationship that was not healthy. And then it ended in flames. And so tell me about that experience of deciding to let go, the pain of navigating that. Yeah, walk me through that.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So upon that retreat, and reading The Mastery of Love, The Four Agreements, I mean, from Hong Kong, I had really started to ponder and think about what it meant to love somebody specifically. And I really did feel like it was an unconditional acceptance, a wishing for somebody to be happy, a pure stream of support. And I was very attached and sought out this person for my happiness, and more so maybe particularly it felt like they sought me out for their happiness, and I derived satisfaction in being happiness to them. I felt, even from the beginning of that relationship, like, I can help this person, I can heal their wounds, I can fix them, da 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 da. I think they kind of saw me as a beacon of hope. Like, you can only save yourself is a common phrase. And I felt like, potentially she might have saw me as somebody who was helping her, fixing her, saving her in some sort of way. That could be wrong. But I basically had to articulate that what I felt in the relationship. So a lot of the relationship up to that point, I was suppressing how I felt out of fear that she would leave. So for the past 3.5 years, from the beginning, I felt like I was unworthy of her in some sort of way. And I felt like she had all of these preferences, and I had to meet the preferences of the guy she wanted, not who I was. And so I was slowly molding myself to be this individual who I was not, to please what she wanted in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to realize that what she wanted and who I was becoming and who I had become is not really what I thought at the core. And it was because over time I had not spoken up over and over and over again. And that was due to me trying to speak up in the past, and then, kind of getting punished for that in a way, for lack of
Yeah.
a better word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it ended up causing more harm than not over and over again. So I was like, I'm just not going to say what's on my mind, which is
Yeah.
unhealthy. And so I finally started to speak up again and be more honest with things. Like, I said, we were FaceTiming every day. And I was like, hey, I really want to focus on the quality of our FaceTime calls. So,
Mm-hmm.
I would love to be, like, present and actively engaged and know what's going on in our lives, da 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 da. Whereas most of the time it was an hour of us just kind of hanging out on our computers or doing laundry or whatever. I really wanted to be
Sure.
actively engaged, but that wasn't what was going on. And I was in Copenhagen. I was like, I want to be exploring. I'm happy not to be exploring or to explore with you, but, like, the way in which we communicate is not fruitful. I feel like we're not growing, we're not connecting, we're just kind of holding space for each other, and not a healthy way, just like occupying distractive space for each other. And I didn't say it exactly like that. I was actually very careful over the words that I used because of previous experiences in that relationship. I think it's probably part of the reason why I'm a good communicator now. It's because I felt like I was always tiptoeing for so long and really needing
Sure.
to articulate clearly.
Yeah.
And the takeaway that was from that is like, oh, you don't want to spend time with me. And I was like, not exactly what I was saying. Long story short, I was realizing that it was a clashing. It was me against her, and I wanted it to be more collaborative. And I had felt like I had exercised an intention for it to be more collaborative, and no progress was being made with that. And it just felt right. Yeah, like this is not the best relationship for me to be in right now. And I was very convicted. I mean, I have journal entries from September. It was December when we broke up. From September of that year when I was in Copenhagen, journal entries that are like, this is the day I break up with my girlfriend. This is the day I break up with my girlfriend. This is the day I break up with my, like, over and over and over again. And I didn't do it. And there are poems of me talking about how it's a poem and it starts off by saying, I'm good. Like, we broke up, but I'm good. You know, everything happens for a reason. I'm good. Truly, I'm good. Like, I can handle this. Da 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 da. But then at the end of the poem, it was something along the lines of, at least that's what I would say, but I'm not okay because we didn't break up today, or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So just
Yeah.
feeling trapped, bro, like knowing what needs to happen and not being able to do it. And so, yeah, pulling out all the stops, journal after journal, conversation with friend after conversation with friend, until honestly the pain of the relationship was so unbearable that I just had to end it, is probably the best way of putting it. Like, there was so
Yeah.
much anxiety on a day-to-day basis, so much frustration with the relationship, which didn't make me feel like a loving partner, you know? Like,
Hmm.
who is this person, and what did they do to deserve a partner who wants to break up with them but doesn't have the courage to do so? Like, that's not real love either. So, yeah, I got the courage to do it and then stay strong in that decision. And oh my gosh, I mean, was that hurting that person? That's the last thing. I mean, I still love this person very dearly. I would say I still love this person unconditionally. I don't want them unhappy. I want to see them only happy. And to know that I, in some way, caused so much pain for them, and that I was causing so much pain for them, that was the biggest part for me. I didn't really care. I was like, I'll be able to endure it. I'll be able to take it. I'm fine. But you, like, I want to make sure you're okay. And one, being the person to cause that pain in the individual, and then two, not being the person who can also help comfort them. I felt very helpless in her suffering as well.
Yeah.
Um,
That's such a
that was hard.
relatable situation. And it's interesting to note how so common it is to be in a situation like that, where the relationship devolves over time because you can't share, and you can't share truthfully, because when you
Mm,
do, they react. And then the less that you share truthfully, the more that they react anytime you do share truthfully. And then, like, it just, like, this cycle starts to happen where now there's this disconnect. And especially when you said you liked to be there for her, to make her happy, and then how much that played in the delay of breaking up. Because as you mentioned at the end there, like, well, I don't want to hurt her, you know?
right.
And so I imagine inside there was like intense amounts of tension, emotional tension inside of you. And I imagine it felt very heavy as it weighed on your mind. And then
Yeah.
so when you're every day saying, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it, and then you didn't do it, was that challenging for you with the discrepancy between intention and action? Was it just like part of the processing? Like, well, how did you transition through that? Which is what I'm trying to ask, because it's so common people get stuck here.
Yeah. Um, for me, kind of like I said earlier, it had just gotten to the point where it was like so painful on a day-to-day basis. So like, I was talking to this person, and the whole time I'm like mildly frustrated. I'm thinking we got to break up. I'm feeling dishonest in what I'm saying because we're saying things like I love you and da, 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 I can't wait to see you, and I'm in my head I'm like, we need to break up. And that
Yeah.
sucks. You know, that's
Yeah.
terrible. It makes me feel like I'm not a good boyfriend at all.
Mm-hmm.
But also feeling trapped from the perspective of like, yeah, if I do this, this is going to hurt this person so badly. And I think
Mm-hmm.
honestly, what got me out of it was thinking more about the other person than me. I was really like, one, who am I to think that I have the ability to like crush this person for so long that they won't be able to recover? That is a big
Right.
ego thing on my end.
Sure.
Two, in the name of this person's well-being, it only does them worse in the long term if I keep this band-aid on. So if I
Mm-hmm.
know really at my core that we need to break up, and I'm not doing it, every day that I delay this is another kind of day of attachment and pain that they would need to heal from. And then I also thought about myself too. Like, this is just going to suck for me until it happens. And it's going to suck after it happens too. But yeah, I think really thinking about the other person, and then again, coming back to just how painful it was to be in the relationship over and over
Yeah.
again. Like, there's this trope with mindfulness and meditation where like 6 months after people start meditating, they have this urge to just like change their life completely because they're
Sure.
more acutely aware of and attuned to all the negative emotions that it's bringing. So typically when we suppress and we numb ourselves from the unpleasantness of life's
Hmm.
experience, then we can tolerate what we're doing that perpetuates these negative emotions because we're not feeling them. But as
Yeah.
we practice mindfulness more, they become much more obvious. And it's like, I feel like crap every day. You've always felt like crap every day. You're just more aware of it now. And now that you're
Yeah.
aware of it, you need to make the changes to not feel like crap. So I would
Yeah.
say I just became so acutely aware to the fact that I did not feel good.
Yeah.
And I knew what had to be done to make progress with that. And I finally got the courage to do that.
Yeah. That's, man, I think that so relatable, hits the nail on the head. One of the things that it makes me think is someone might listen to that and say, well, why the hell would I start meditating? But I think it's worth mentioning that, like, it's kind of like a credit card. Like, the longer you don't pay it off, the more you're going to have to pay. And so you can ignore the fact that interest is rising, but at some point the collection is going to come. And it's simply like pay now or pay later. And it's basically always better to simply pay now. And so the longer we delay, the more pain it causes. So, okay. So you ended up breaking up with her then. And was that when you came back from Copenhagen, or was that while you're in Copenhagen?
Yeah, that was while I was in Copenhagen because she was going to come visit me. And I was like, this would not be good if she
Yeah.
came. Yeah.
Yeah. Please don't.
Yeah. So that happened. And then my mom came shortly after. So this is like December of 2021. And I went back late December of 2021. So yeah, it was towards the end of my trip in Copenhagen. And yeah, that was tough. It made me realize just how frequently I thought about her and just how frequently I communicated with her and just how much of a part of my life she was. When she was
Yeah.
gone, that void was huge. And it was like, whoa, I have so much free time now. And part of it was liberating. I was like, oh, I can go on a walk for 30 minutes and leave my phone in my
Right.
house. That was mind boggling to me. But another part of it was like, oh my gosh, this person takes up still so much of my, there's still conditioned thought patterns and wants to text and
Hmm.
wants to think. And I realized how much I had thought about this person and how much of a big part of my life they were and how much at that point in time I had built an attachment to that person because that's really what it signified to me. Oh my gosh, I'm thinking about this person all the time. I want to talk to this person all the time. I feel empty without talking to this person. I was attached to this person and I've relinquished that
Right.
attachment and now I'm experiencing kind of the after effects of that.
Yeah. Got it. And yeah, so that void can just be so massive.
Yes.
But again, I mean, part of it, the way it's through, right? You simply experience the experience and continue on. And so as you were dealing with, let's say, the aftermath of that and the adjusting to a new life, the single life, a lot more change started to take place for you. Like, as in,
Yes.
so where did you go from here?
So very shortly after we had broken up, while I was still in Copenhagen, I had actually rescinded my job offer from Microsoft. So I was going to go work there full time. I'd accepted a full time job offer. And I had realized a big part of that was because my previous partner had really emphasized a preference towards security and knowing what was going to happen. So I was going to go to Microsoft. We were going to live in Seattle. I was going to be making good money. We would be able to live that way, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a lot more risk tolerant. So I was like, I'm not fully happy doing this thing. I deserve to be happy doing whatever I do. Also, I guess what helped me get the courage to break up with her was a lot of affirmations, actually, now that I remember it. I
Yeah.
was like writing in my journal every day, like, I am confident. I am walking abundantly. I am, you know, successful in what I do. I love what I do. I am happy. Da, 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 da. Like I did a lot of affirmations and that started to build the confidence in me. And there's a lot of inspiring people that I was around and they were showing me their inspirations. Just people who are like living out their dreams and doing what they love and seeing that passion. That was really inspiring for me. So I was feeling very artistic and creative and like, hey, I can do whatever I want. I also realized how minimally I was living. So I was in Copenhagen for 5 months at the time. I had traveled to like 15 different countries. I had spent a lot of money on clothes. I had bought an iPad, and I had spent less than like $12,000 in 5 months. And I was like, what? I was paying for my housing too. It's like, life really isn't
Mm-hmm.
as expensive as people say it is. Why do I need $180,000 at Microsoft? Like,
Yeah.
I could be making 30 grand and comfortably be living, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I was like, yeah, I deserve to be doing something that I love. So I rescinded my job offer from Microsoft, and I was like, I'm going to start, making vlogs. So I started posting on YouTube and stuff. But that was really the beginning of a much deeper self-exploration journey of understanding who I was and what I wanted to do and how to
Mm-hmm.
integrate with this world. And so I get back from Copenhagen. I'm at school for what would have been my very last semester, my second semester of senior year. I'm like 3 months into the semester, about halfway through. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do something consequential for an inconsequential amount of time. So I completely, no tech, no classes, no school, no talking with anybody, no anything for a week. I would wake up, meditate for about an hour, do yoga, work out, eat a nice meal. Then I would go to the quad on my campus at UNC, sit down, have one mindfulness book with me, and I would just observe for like 8 hours, just be
Mm-hmm.
there. I earned the nickname Mindful Joe because people would see me on the quad and they'd be like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm being mindful." They're like, "What's your name?" "Joe." "Okay, you're Mindful Joe." And then people would be like, "Hey, you got to come meet Mindful Joe," which was funny.
You became a tourist attraction on the quad.
I did. So at the end of that week, I was like, you know what? I genuinely, truthfully feel that if I took life fully into my own hands and used my time how I want to use my time rather than how I would need to use my time to finish this degree, it would be more beneficial for me. I realized all of the thoughts and conversations and people that we surround ourselves with, they matter. They influence the way that we act and the way that we speak, and thus if we suffer or don't suffer, et cetera, et cetera. And then, yeah, I also realized that I had a better idea of what I needed for my time than probably the school did. So I left school. I realized a lot of my internal turmoil came from not dealing with like family relationships and could probably be better if I just addressed and had better, more loving relationships with my family, those close to me.
Right.
So I decided to drop out of school. I was met with a lot of not support from friends. I had basically like left or dropped an entire group of friends because they were very unsupportive with it. Some family members were very unsupportive. 4 or 5 months after a breakup, I had rescinded my job offer from Microsoft. Like, from a lot of people's perspective, my life was like falling apart. But from
Yeah.
mine, I felt like I was finally building it up from the foundations, but a foundation that was in alignment with, for lack of a better word, like who I really was and my true self and what I wanted to do. And I didn't know what that looked like, but I know what it felt like. And so I had a much better feel of my inner compass and what I needed to do. And I had more courage to be able to say, hey, this feels right. I can't give you the best explanation for it, but I'm going to do this because I know I need to. And you can choose to accept that or not. And kind of unapologetically being myself.
What a challenging thing that is to do. Like, you're 1 or 2 months out from graduating the program, and to decide to really realize, like, you know what, this isn't for me. And almost anyone else would say, well, just tough it up, tough it out, just go finish it. But
Right.
the leap of faith and the full dedication to, I'm going to live a life that's in alignment with me while everyone around you doesn't support it. Like, that's so challenging. And few people have maybe the guts to do something like that, and as a consequence end up living in a life that they don't want to live.
Mm.
And to then also be willing to sacrifice everything. Like, that's really what this is, right? You sacrificed everything to be willing to create something that was significantly and fundamentally different than what you had been experiencing. And even when the people around you, your friends, your family, were like, Joe, what the hell are you doing? Right? Like, your life is falling apart.
Yeah.
To be willing to stick to your guns through that. How did you navigate that? How did you stay true to yourself through that?
Yeah. It was very clear to me how others were suffering. And I'll put it like this. At this point in time, and it was clear to me how I myself was suffering too. So this is probably like the most nihilistic I ever got was around this point in time, actually. I don't know if it was before I dropped out. I think it's probably after I dropped out that I got pretty nihilistic because everything just felt my life was totally different. All plans I had had previously, all things that who I was as a person was radically different. I was filming
Hmm.
videos, posting to YouTube, meditating an hour a day, yoga every day. I mean, there were some things that were correlated and that were similar, but basically 90 to 95% of my habits that I was embodying at that time were not habits that I had a year before. And just about 100% of them were not habits that I had 4 years before, except for basic eating, sleeping. But even what I was eating was pretty different. The people I was interacting with were different, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
But the peculiar phenomena that I had observed was that I was going to bed at 11 every night and waking up at 7 every morning, like clockwork. I was meditating
Hmm.
every morning for an hour. I was doing deep work for multiple hours. I was getting time outside. I was eating 2 meals a day, very healthy. I was working out
Hmm.
and I was reading. I was learning. I was educating myself and I was trying to start a business. And I was very routined and very not distracted and very on top of things. My roommates, which this is no criticism to them, just simply an observation, because as I've more so come to embody, things just are and they happen as they happen, and there's no need to point or label. But just to
Yeah.
paint a picture, both of my roommates are in situationships in their last semester. One's constantly like hooking up with girls on Tinder. Another one has this
Hmm.
like kind of toxic situation, relationship kind of thing going on. They're coming home super late, drunk frequently. Yeah, not very happy, clearly pretty like tense and anxious frequently. Yet I was the one that was ruining my life in their eyes. And so what I started to realize as well is that I was triggering people and it had
Hmm.
nothing to do with me. So this goes back to the 4 agreements. One of them is don't take anything personally. And so that's what I really had to keep to heart is like, whatever anybody says to me, positive or negative, is a projection of them onto me. So at that point in
Yes.
time, I had to be very strict with myself on not having a preference towards dropping out or not dropping out, as if there was a right decision. What I constantly told myself is there are two decisions, and those are just decisions, and neither of them are wrong. They just lead different paths, and neither of those paths are wrong. And I kind of had this like rebellious little part of me that was resistant to the education system and the school system and thought other people were doing things wrong, et cetera, et cetera. But what I had revealed to so many of my friends and the people around me were, hey, this path that you're on, you actually don't need to be on it. You could
Hmm.
drop out if you wanted to. You could not take the corporate job if you wanted to. You
Hmm.
could pursue the path that your heart is calling for if you wanted to. And you're not. And I'm very clearly showing you that you're not.
Yeah. Holding up the mirror to them.
Yeah, I made it
Yeah.
clear that it was an option for them to do that. Whereas previously
Yeah.
we had kind of been in this cluster hive mind situation where
Hmm.
everybody around us was doing the same thing. So of course we're going to do that. And nobody is challenging it.
Hmm.
So of course we're all just going to keep any reservations or thoughts that we have about it to ourselves. And oh, it would be
Yeah.
crazy if I thought about dropping out. Well, what happens when the
Yeah.
guy actually does drop out? You know what I mean? And I saw that being true and showcased not only for those around me that were other students, but family members, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
a lot of it was really deeply seeing how it had nothing to do with me, how it was not personal. I was just triggering other people's beliefs, thoughts, etc.
Yeah. And I want to touch on that for a moment because I think that's a really profound realization that is massively impactful and leads to us living authentic lives. What you said about how people's reactions were projections of their own internal state onto you. It actually had nothing to do with you. Because, for example, if someone you take, I'm going to go extreme for the sake of illustration, you take a monk who's fully enlightened, fully at peace. If you dropped out, he's not going to be upset about it. He's like, oh, okay, well, that's simply a choice, because inside of him would be some emotional state, let's say peace and equanimity and tranquility and all of those pleasant things.
Yeah.
And your actions would trigger a response from that peaceful state, as in
Mhm.
whatever is inside someone gets projected out onto others. If you then told somebody, hey, I'm dropping out, and they were angry all of the time inside of themselves, they would project anger onto the situation. Who the hell do you think you are? You are stupid, whatever. If someone had sadness inside of them, they would project that. And it would be, my life is sucks. Why can't I be like Joe? Or whatever it is, right? And so
Yeah.
we notice that all of the behaviors of others are just projections of their internal state. And inside of ourselves, all of our reactions are projections of our internal state.
Yeah. That second part is really important. because we've been talking a lot about how my actions triggered responses in other people in their states. There was a big part of growth and probably the most, just the work. There's all this buried stuff that was inside of me that had judgments towards other people myself. And so coming to terms and truly clearly seeing that that was a projection of my own biases and beliefs and had nothing to do with me. So I was crying a lot. I mean, due to the breakup, due to all the things that are going on, like very
Yeah.
frequently I was crying. And it would not be uncommon for me to sit down in meditation and, 5 or 10 minutes in, just start bawling in tears. And just
Yeah.
that happens throughout the whole duration of the meditation. So
Yeah.
yeah, there was a lot of, bundled up stuff. And so I've always been pretty good about like being able to cry and open about, my emotions and et
Hmm.
cetera, feeling them, whatnot. But yeah, there's just deeper and deeper stuff that we hold down in here. And so there was a point in time where I don't think I had cried or released in a little bit. I was just feeling lost, feeling nihilistic, feeling very like, everybody seems to be so happy going bowling, but like, I can't trick myself into being happy going bowling and distracting like there's real true emotional depth and like girth to this situation and substance, and I can't just
Yeah.
ignore all of this and distract myself. I think many people are stuck distracting themselves with their lifestyles, and I had gotten to the point where I had realized how much I had been distracting myself and didn't want to do that anymore. So I wasn't going to choose to go out and artificially have fun distracting myself, whatever, right? Now I love going bowling. We could go bowling right now and I'd be a happy camper. But that was just not, at that point in time, it's not where I was at. And so, yeah, I felt very disconnected, felt like nobody related to me again. And yeah, I had just kind of been isolated, feeling isolated and hadn't processed. And everything just felt hopeless and stupid and nihilistic and meaningless and worthless and pointless. And then one day, that shifted when I had this realization that so much of the criticism that I had over my father and his money tendencies, I actually exhibited the same things. I was reckless with my spending, was making stupid purchases. Yeah, all this anger that I'd projected out to him was actually anger that I had felt towards myself, or anger towards myself, or just me projecting my own actions onto him in some sort of way. And so that realization was in the middle of a meditation. I just started bawling, and it was this big release, and I felt so bad, and I wanted to apologize to my dad and be easier on myself and start making changes for me. And yeah, among all this like very spiritual, esoteric, out of body experience leading to all of this, it's like at the heart of this is the most human stuff, dude. Like breaking up with a girlfriend, or realizing your friendships aren't the way that they should be, or realizing that you need to love your dad more and be more apologetic, and what you're
Hmm.
really angry at is not him but like things inside of you. Like those releases, those deep dives into the nature of self and the substance of self and what makes you you, and the
Hmm.
painful stuff and belief systems that we've been accumulating over
Yeah.
time, and diving into that, like that's where the real work seems to be.
Yeah. I love that you said that. I love your articulation of that. It's so true. And it's the place we least want to look.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things I really appreciate about your articulation of this is that as we go through this journey, we get into these very dark spaces. And it's not wrong. Like, so for anyone listening, it's not wrong that you're there,
No.
in that that's part of the journey. And it's actually a critical part of the journey. And the way out of it is through it. It's not by suppressing it or numbing it or avoiding it, but you simply need to get through it. And then as you get through it, which will be a journey and it will be hard as it was for you and me and every other human being who's ever gone through anything challenging.
And
It's
continues to
challenging.
be.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
continues to be. But you also start to get many wonderful rewards, which you've alluded to, right? Like where the happiness that you now feel. And I think it's evident just coming through your voice, the peace. And there's a realness to it, right? Like there's a state of being that can be felt when you even just hear somebody speak. And so, yeah, I just wanted to touch on that for a moment. And yeah, you had a beautiful articulation of that. And so as you continued to move through this, you got the loneliness, the pain, you're crying, you're, yeah, nihilistic. What started to change for you? Like, what happened as you move forward?
Right. So I would say it really started to build resilience. So I started to understand just how much I could take and just how strong I
Mm,
was, which was cool.
yeah.
I also was still super deep into meditation and mindfulness and all of this stuff. And so I was meditating frequently, reading frequently, and that led to me wanting to be entrepreneurial. I've always kind of wanted to be entrepreneurial and always have been entrepreneurial. So I started doing mindfulness coaching with people. I moved out
Yeah.
here actually to this house in Arizona with my brother for about a month. So I dropped out of school, was in Chapel Hill for a little bit, but I was like, I need to spend time with my family. So
Sure.
I spent about a month here in Arizona. I remember while I was here, I started posting all these mindfulness things on Instagram and the insights I was learning. And then I'd be like, hey, book a free mindfulness session with me. Like, why not?
Yeah.
So I started taking some mindfulness clients for the first time. That was fun. Some relatability. I started meeting some commonly minded people, so to speak. And then after Arizona, I went to like Disney with my family. There's a lot of like personal story type things that I think I'll probably glaze over for the time being
Yeah.
right now.
That's okay.
But then I ended up in Vermont living with my mom, and that was a good environment for me. I had found a gym that I was working out at consistently, personal trainer. I started landscaping, so I got a little bit of money. I was outside in nature all day. I had discovered while I was there a book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha by Daniel Ingram. I was like obsessed with that book, meditating multiple hours a day. And I was in Vermont for a few months. I made YouTube videos at that time. It was just a fun time in Vermont.
Yeah.
And while I was there, I had made the decision that I wanted to go back to school for myself to finish up my degree. But yeah, that was like a really nice time, my time in Vermont. I felt like I was journaling. I was pretty isolated. I was just with my mom and her boyfriend and his family at the time. But I was, taking care of my health. I was growing in mindfulness, growing in knowledge, kind of this book, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, that really helped because it, one, allowed me to realize, okay, these experiences that I had are normal and they're commonly shared by people. Two, it's actually encouraging because they're experiences that are on a well-documented path that leads to ultimate inner peace, clear seeing of, what's going on here. The path is going to be and will be very painful. Like, there's parts in the journey, so to speak, where it's like you have this high. I could probably equate that to when I was in Hong Kong and I was reading these books and I felt amazing and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna be myself and happy. And then you have this low, this event that takes place that's like craziest thing ever. That was, the out of body experience. And then that plummets you into this like spiritual depression, so to speak. And so I felt like I was like in this depression for so long. Around the time I got to Vermont is when I felt like I was really feeling like happier and more vibrant and energetic. But that's also a thing. You kind of stabilize in this equanimous, peaceful state. And so I'm reading this book and it's just describing thing after thing, cognition after cognition, event after event in my life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. Like this journey that I'm on is normal and it's shared. And it's really, you could probably strip it down to just like stages of cognitive development in people. But I was able to see that and validate that for the first time through that book. And then that also gave me not only, okay, this is where I've been, this is where I'm at, but this is what I can expect ahead of me. So then it was like, oh, I got a map of the journey a little bit.
Yeah.
And that just, so much pressure, stress, anxiety, whatever, taken off my shoulders, relatability, etc. So yeah, I did that, was in Vermont for a while. And then I went back to school January of 2023, but in like the last 4 months of 2022, I came back to my hometown in North Carolina and I was working at like a warehouse, also working at a gym. I was still growing my YouTube channel. So at that point in time, I actually had Frank Yang on my podcast on my YouTube channel. That's still like the most viewed YouTube video that I have. But that Frank Yang video was significant because it brought community to my YouTube channel. So now I had other like-minded people also trying to understand this stuff, also going through similar experiences that I was, and I could actually help people. So then that gave me a real sense of purpose over like one, in general, I have experienced that people are suffering. That's why I dropped out of school, quit the job. I realized I was suffering. I realized there's a better path. I didn't know what that path was. And so visiting Arizona, dropping out, being in Vermont, that was kind of me in many ways discovering who am I and what do I like and what's important and what's my value to share. We met just before I went to Vermont, actually. So I met you. So I dropped a lot of friends and then started making more aligned friends, which was great. And then, yeah, back in North Carolina before my last semester of school, I have Frank Yang on the podcast. And now I have like other meditators, community members, relatable people. So things just kept looking up. More community was being built. And I started getting a better view of like what's truly fulfilling to me, how I can help people, and who I am, really. Yeah. So then I went to school for my last semester, 2023. At the beginning of that, I started an independent study where I built a curriculum rooted in mindfulness and self-discovery for student wellness for the students at the business school. So I realized a lot of it is due to lack of self-discovery, lack of self-belief, lack of self-confidence, where these kids are really smart, really capable, getting this education and then going into these lucrative job industries where they're unhappy. And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly where I was. So I felt called to build a curriculum. And then during that semester, ChatGPT 3.5 came out. Me, and our friend who's a software engineer started building this AI LLM chatbot called Buddy that was going to help students with their flourishing and mental well-being. That got me into AI and stuff. And then, long story short, I graduated that summer while we were building Buddy. And then ever since then, I've been doing entrepreneurial related stuff in the field of like education, technology, mindfulness, connection, community, well-being, etc.
Yeah, that's wonderful. One of the things, the core themes that I heard you say there was that, so from that period of darkness, the dark night of the soul, as it's referred to in Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, as you come out of that, or rather, as you find yourself in that, because all the pieces fall apart, you can start to align the pieces in a way that feels resonant within ourselves. The thing that feels truthful to ourselves and who we want to be, even when everyone else around us doesn't understand it. That's okay, because as we align those pieces inside, the people, the situations, etc., outside of us that is not aligned with the authentic version will fall away, and the right people, the right situations, the aligned things will now come into life. And there
Yes.
is a delay between
Yes.
when that happens, which is scary and challenging, and you got to persevere through that. But consistently in all walks of life, it seems to be that if you persevere, you will find the right people, you will find the right situations. There's an attraction that starts to happen there. Does that seem fair to you, or would you add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just like to double down on the emphasis that usually there's a period of time where you're kind of in limbo.
Yeah.
So it's like, you drop a friend group and then you're very lonely and isolated and don't have anybody until more friends start to pop up. And I see that time
Yeah.
and time again. Sometimes that period is longer, sometimes it's shorter, but it requires a leap of faith. It's like,
Yeah.
if you're in an unhealthy relationship, usually your next healthy relationship doesn't come along while you're still in that unhealthy relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay. And so you went and you did all of these things like making the curriculum for the school,
Mhm.
working on Buddy,
Mhm.
and now you're doing mindfulness and tech, and you're doing these wonderful things in your life. And I suppose one of the important things is, who did you become as a result of all of this? Because it's not just about what did you achieve, right? Like achievements are great, but who did you become along the way?
Right, right. In many ways, I became who I always have been and who I always was, just more authentically integrated. Like now, for example, I'm building a tech company still, share mindfulness and meditation with people and well-being. That's what a lot of it is centered around. I have my
Yeah.
friends who I talk to online. I have my isolated time. I have my in-person community. I work with education and with students really deeply into psychology. I love to travel. I'm traveling right now, visiting my brother in Arizona. And yeah, I'm the same person I have been. It's just now each of these parts of me that I've kind of rediscovered, like the tech part of me,
Mm-hmm.
that's always been there. I imagine it
Mm-hmm.
will always be there. If it falls away, fine, it falls away.
Mm-hmm.
The joyful, kind of open, curious, loving, peaceful, accepting, very human centered side of me. That's always been there. It's just brought out more now. The
Mm-hmm.
writer in me that wants to sit down and just write for 2 hours a day, that's there. The,
Mm-hmm.
super heady, let's build systems and put things together and link our thinking, like that's still there. All of
Mm-hmm.
these parts of me that were there previously are still here now. They're just being
Mm-hmm.
expressed more authentically than they were previously. So in losing
Yeah.
myself, I've really found myself. But I gave all of these things, the YouTube channel, basketball, health, meditation, even for periods of time, technology. I've given up all of these things in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a real letting go. And it's very cliche, but I love the saying. And this was another thing that got me through my ability to break up in the relationship. If you love something, let it go. If it comes back, it's meant to be. And so not
Yeah.
only did I feel that way about my relationship, I felt that way about my friends. I felt that way about career. I felt that way about technology. I felt that way about basketball. I grew up playing basketball my whole life. There, I kind of
Yeah.
let it go for a while. And so it's like I'm continuously letting things go over and over and over again, not trying to grip, not trying to cling, not trying to hold on to,
Mm-hmm.
and having a willingness to let go and not being afraid to let go of anything in my life
Mm-hmm.
allows me to see what's there and what naturally arises.
Mm-hmm.
So like, we've talked about this before. If our relationship had to end tomorrow, we'd both be good. There's no doubt in my
Yeah.
mind about that. And the fact
Yeah.
that we're
So
both
be it.
willing to let go of our friendship and that we're okay with that
Yeah.
idea, yet it's still here, that to me just shows how
Mm-hmm.
like resonant and truthful and beautiful it is. So having the
Yeah.
courage and the willingness to let everything go in your life and then seeing what still emerges, that's, I think, what I found. And
Yeah.
maybe some things have left, some things have gone away, sure. But for the most part, like, I'm still the same dude doing roughly the same things. It's just a more evolved form of that with some time.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's a lot of alignment within yourself that has created external alignment. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm kind of reading between the lines as you say that there's also the peace, the equanimity, the happiness, the enjoyment, the satisfaction that paradoxically comes when you stop seeking those things.
Mm.
Like as you let go, as you surrendered all of those things that seemed quote unquote important to you, what started to come was that what was authentic and aligned was naturally in your life to a degree that was more authentic and more aligned. And because you could let go of those things due to the mindfulness meditation practices, the enlightenment pursuit, all of a sudden in the letting go, the negative feelings that were there before as well, the frustration, the anger, the sadness, the loss, the confusion, etc., those started to disappear as well. And then what was left was the positive.
Mm.
Feel accurate for you, or would you, yeah, did I get that right, or would you change that?
Yeah, I would say definitely like 99% of my being has changed to be more peaceful, equanimous, accepting, etc. That doesn't mean that confusion still comes up. That doesn't mean that frustration doesn't still come up. That doesn't mean that like, at times I'll be like, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. I think it's actually very important to surrender to the mystery of all of this and not be too sure of anything and like really just sit and not knowing, but in not knowing and full faith,
Mm-hmm.
because anything can happen. As I saw in that out of
Yeah.
body experience in Hong Kong, like I could get in a snap transported somewhere totally out of body at any point in time.
Yeah.
But, like even amidst confusion that arises, frustration that arises, it's not labeled as bad. I mean, it's just a part of the body processing what the body does. There's tension in the body. There's stress in the body. There's our nervous systems need regulation. That doesn't happen in a day, but I feel equipped to handle
Mm-hmm.
that. I feel resilient in that coming up, and I
Yeah.
see it for what it is now. Like, before, if doubts or thoughts or confusion came up, I thought it was the end of the world, bro. I mean, I thought it was much more severe and intense and world changing and ending than it actually was. And now it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
this unpleasant thing is here. Let's sit with it. Or, oh, I'm
Mm-hmm.
running away from this thing. Why is that? Oh, I'm averse to this thing. Why is that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's just a general curiosity over what happens and a non-attachment to whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. But ironically, as you would point to, that leads to a lot more pleasantness and happiness and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for the clarification. And as we wrap up here, Joe, where can people find you? If people want to reach out to you, they want to talk to you, they want to connect with the work that you're doing, where can they reach out?
So hivemind.io, HYVEMYND.io is my website application project that I've been building for the past couple of years. You can visit there. You can email me, joe@hivemind.io. I'll be able to reply there. I have a YouTube channel, which is my name, Joe Niemchak. I have videos that I upload there. Feel free to comment on any of my YouTube videos. My LinkedIn is also Joe Niemchak. Feel free to send me a message or connect with me on LinkedIn. Email is probably the best place to go, I would say.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I'll put all of those in the notes below the video. So, or the podcast, wherever you're listening, you can find those, and definitely encourage you, reach out to Joe. He is an amazing person to talk to, in case you haven't noticed. But if you made it this far, I'm sure you also enjoyed listening to our chat. And Joe, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. This was so insightful, so valuable. And I know that if anyone takes any of the snippets away from this, any of the golden nuggets, that their life will improve. And so thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing such wonderful things with us.
Thank you for the space and the kind words. And something I didn't mention a lot, which is kind of foundational to my sense of being that I want to add before we wrap up, is just,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, always coming back to love, presence and love, and having compassion and truly embodying love to other people. I think love is the greatest thing, the greatest medicine, all the above. We can simply continue to be in love and share love and spread love and realize that all of this already is love. We effortlessly are love as our true nature. So just continue to be yourself as love and recognize your nature as love, or something deeper, who knows? But yeah, love. I just wanted to throw that in at the end here. Above anything else, just love.
Yeah. And such an important message. I'm glad you threw that in. And it's just so critical. It's almost cliche. And yet the more that I explore it to see if it's true, the more it continually resonates as a foundational truth. And so I'm really happy you added that in. Okay. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll see you soon with the next episode.
Peace and love.